Hi, this is Dr. Christine Bishara doing yet another interview with HD Tudor. I think this is my sixth interview with him. And the reason why I continue to interview HD Tudor is that even though he has no medical background, he provides so much valuable information where someone can detect subtle differences or behaviors in different types of narcissists that you may not necessarily be able to pick up on if you just read a medical book. So once again, HG, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me along again, Christine. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. All right, so let's dig in. I have a few questions that I was really interested in getting your input on. So we talked a lot, we talked a lot about narcissists and those with narcissistic personality disorder, but we've also talked about people who are not necessarily narcissists, but are narcissistic. So the question arises, the difference is the narcissist has no empathy at all. Someone who's narcissistic has a small amount of empathy. Is there anything in their behaviors that can allow someone to detect whether or not this person is an actual narcissist versus narcissistic, or is that something that requires a little more in-depth evaluation?
There is, in essence, no one thing that's ever going to tell you, because one thing is just a snap of somebody's behavior. So if we take, for example, you walk into a convenience store and you are confronted by a woman who's throwing around tins of food. She's shouting, she's screaming, she's vaulting up onto the counter and trying to get money out of the till, and is issuing various injunctions of an unfavorable nature towards the shopkeeper. What are we dealing with here? Well, what do we see? She's certainly acting without a sense of entitlement. It would appear that she's acting with no emotional empathy towards this shopkeeper and the other people in the store. She's not showing much accountability for her behaviors. One could say that she's being rudimentary manipulative because she's trying to steal from him and damage his produce. So we've had a few narcissistic indicators here. Is the narcissist? We really don't know, because she might be, and therefore we are seeing all of those things which are a constant in her life. Or what we might be witnessing is somebody who's actually faced a situation where her husband's at home and able to work. She's just lost her job and she's attempted to buy some groceries and the car isn't working and it's pushed her over and therefore he's flipped out. And those external stresses of an ill husband, losing her job and the car being rejected, has caused a diminution in her emotional empathy, so she gets out. So we can't say from just one interaction, oh, this person is this. What one must do is look at a range of behaviors over a sustained period of time to get a valued and evidence-based answer. Okay. What you can, of course, do is recognize that some behavior towards you isn't pleasant and make a determination that you don't be near them and back away. That goes irrespective of what that person is. You're looking at the behavior, not what they are. Your follow-up, of course, is dependent upon what they are, because somebody who doesn't habitually behave that way, you're more likely to be forgiving and see what was wrong and make an allowance for it. If you learn that this individual is habitually somebody that causes trouble, you're obviously better off staying well away from them.
Okay, so in terms of somebody, for example, if you have a partner or a family member that's a narcissistic, do they also devalue the intimate partner primary source in the same manner?
Well, we wouldn't call it devaluation, because where I utilize valuation and normalization is purely within the dynamic between a narcissist and a victim. And I'll keep it within those confines so it's clear that we're talking about narcissists and the narcissistic dynamic.
Yeah.
What you can say is that somebody who's narcissistic, their behavior is abusive. So one would describe it as such, but I don't apply the label rather of devaluing to it, just to make the distinction so that you know that those terms used when you mean a narcissist. You could, of course, call it devaluing behavior because that narcissistic person is treating somebody in a way which is devaluing them. But I think it's easier. It's in the same way. Some people often say, "Oh, HG, I have a need for fuel." I say, "You don't, because you're not a narcissist." I understand what you're driving at. You're saying that motivates you, but don't call fuel. fuel is the preserve of the narcissist. We use that term to know that we're talking about narcissists. So similarly with devaluing behavior, attribute that to the way that a narcissist behaves with somebody who's narcissist. They don't follow the same pattern that a narcissist does, but they can be just as abusive.
Okay. Interesting. So let's talk a little bit about the schools of narcissists, the lessers, middle, and graders. A lot of your videos kind of, maybe this is how I'm interpreting it, as the lessers as being less cognitively inclined as the middles and then the graders. Does the school classification kind of correlate with the IQ or not necessarily? Like, are all middles smarter than all lessers or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. So cognitive function is but one determinant where we place an ascertained narcissist in various sub-schools. There are lots of different things that go in there with it. So we would look at such matters as the use of fury. Is it cold? Where does the threshold lie on that fury? Do they trigger, or do they look virtually implacable, almost glacial, before they perhaps show a glimmer of that fury? What's the attitude in terms of pity plays? Do we soothe, and how substantial are they? Is there superficiality, or at least the appearance of death? About of property, where does that take? Use of physical violence. Are there Machiavellian behaviors?
Okay. Machiavellian.
So there's lots and
yeah, go ahead.
There's lots and lots of different facts that will be seen through all of them. Some you won't see them. So in certain schools, and they are peculiar to one school or even perhaps a sub-school. And so what we do is one looks at the evidence and then utilizes all those various criteria, of which there are many, to make that determination, fine-tune it. Now, with cognitive function, generally speaking, lessers are your dimwits, lower lesser and middle lesser. Okay, upper lesser, they can similarly be stupid, but they also can be intelligent. So you can have very intelligent upper lessers and you can have stupid upper lessers, because intelligence of itself doesn't put them in that category. It is but one of many factors. So you could have an upper lesser that's more intelligent than certain mid-range narcissists, but he doesn't get into range because there's different criteria that make him upper lesser. Okay. With mid-range narcissists, you can have some very clever lower mid-range narcissists who are cleverer than mid-range A or B or upper mid-range. But then you can also have some, because of the other factors, where they're not that bright. Generally speaking, you'll find that your upper mid-range are going to be moderate to high in cognitive function. You don't find witted mid-range narcissists where there's a difference. With middle mid-range, some of them can be lowish in cognitive function, but not out and out stupid. And some could be very bright, and some could be moderate. So with the lower lesser is invariably going to be a dimwit. Your middle lesser is the dimwit. Upper lesser can range from pretty stupid through to hugely intelligent. Have a broad range within lesser M and B when it comes to cognitive function. Across range, in general terms, mid-rangers tend to be cleverer than lessers, but may not necessarily be so in relation to an upper lesser. And upper mid-range, you won't find stupid upper mid-rangers. So it is but one factor, one criterion that's applicable to the determination.
And is the characteristic of the ability to control the fury also one that you use to kind of classify them?
Yeah. So your hair trigger is invariably going to point towards lesser. Okay. Again, it's not determinate of itself. You'll take other matters into account, but it is a fairly substantial factor that leads to it. And what you tend to find of certain factors, of course, generate other ones. So in the case that if someone has threshold on their ignited fury, It tends to be that you see heated fury, and it often means you'll see physical violence, and it often means you'll see destruction of property, which are all lesser indicators. So those type of individuals invariably engage in certain behaviors, go to emphasize their lesser status. And then mid-rangers, they have a better for their ignited fury because they invariably operate facade kinds. And then with the greaters, they have a very high threshold on their ignited fury, so that you don't see them, for want of a better description, losing their shit arbitrarily.
I'm curious when you mention this, because I've seen some narcissists with age, and I know you say whatever school you're in is the school you stay in, but I've actually seen some narcissists almost become like a middle, become a lesser in behavior, where they're more violent and more aggressive than they were maybe in their younger years, you know. So I'm wondering, is that just because of the fact that they're not getting their prime aims met as well, or can they change classes?
Well, it can work both ways. You don't change sub-school. What happens is that you'll find, of course, that as a narcissist ages, and there's no broad brush approach, as you identify, some become sort of irascible characters. And the reason for that is that their control is being threatened more regularly, so their ability to cope with that lessens, so that they've only got so much in the tank to deal with it. So they basically become a grumpy old man. Why? Yeah. Because years of them treating people like crap has resulted in family members going, don't want to be with this. I'm not going to bother. I'm not going to go and see Ganga. You know, I've had 30 years of him bullying me. I've had enough of it, and I'm not going, and I'm not taking the grandchildren. And of course, the individual may be less mobile, and friends die off. So his non-intimate secondary source group of friends has diminished, and he might have fallen out with a couple of them over time, and they think, I'm not going to go and see that old tosser. He's just rude to me. Yeah. There might be long-suffering intimate partner primary source, and therefore what happens is that she might be keeping the way because she knows that he's a so even though he doesn't really, he's a narcissist. So what happens is people aren't doing what he wants. Where are my kids? Why are they not seeing me? That wounds him. So that's a threat to control, which would cause an ignition of fury. His fuel are probably as they once were, which makes him more susceptible to responses. So although he won't shift sub-school, he may have greater demonstrations of heated fury. Say, for example, he was a relatively mild middle range type A narcissist, but that middle range A narcissist still has the capacity for engaging in physical violence, still has the capacity to lash out at people verbally. It doesn't happen as often. Whereas, because of certain stressors, as the ones that I've mentioned, repeated threats to control, the diminution of coping, and lowering fuel levels, his mild manner becomes less so, and he behaves more with heated fury. So he doesn't sub-school, you just saw manifestations of a particular type of behavior. And it works the other way, of course, that some narcissists actually seem to mellow out. And the reason is that the narcissism basically trades off the lashing out at somebody because it realizes we need this residual benefit of this person to wipe my bum and give me my medication.
Right.
And therefore, if we're smacking grandma with a walking stick, so that she decides she's going to run off with the vicar, that leaves that narcissist high and dry. There's nobody there to wipe his bum and give him his medications. The narcissist recognizes that IP providing me with a residual benefit of giving me the medication and attending to my ablutions, etc. We need to try and row down. So there's a sacrifice of control versus the residual benefit. He'll control in an alternative way. He doesn't give it up completely. Rather than do it directly with heated fury and cracking her over the head with a walking stick, he does so by muttering about her behind her back to Stan at the bowls club or on the telephone, etc.
Right. It's really a defense mechanism that has to readjust based on the needs, I guess. So, yeah.
So you get that readjustment, of course, when it comes to the issue of control. Either do it directly, but if that can't be done or isn't working, move to indirect. If that can't be done or isn't working, move to withdrawal.
Yeah.
So control is always obtained. So you can see a scenario whereby that ordinarily he would lash out at her with verbal and physical violence, but then assist with him less often. So the narcissist recognizes that's becoming problematic. Still has to have control over her, but recognizing that lashing out isn't going to get what it needs. It just leads to a threat to control. It does not bring that control, and also threatens a further threat to control as a consequence of not being given the medication, because the absence of being given medication, having somebody attend ablutions, would also wound. So the narcissism, because it's a self-defense mechanism, basically goes, by asserting control over her, by hitting her, we're running the risk of stopping attending to the other things, which causes a problem for us. Yeah. So we're not going to go down that route directly. We're going to do it indirectly instead, which preserves her looking after us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing how the narcissism is able to control the reaction in a way. I mean, I guess with lessers, it's a little bit harder, but I just find that very interesting. Mm-hmm. I had a question for you about celebrities, because I know that you mentioned there are a lot of celebrities that are graders, so they're obviously aware.
Yeah.
Now, is this what makes them a celebrity? Is it because they have such calculation and manipulation, and they're willing to basically step all over whoever they need to get to the top? Is that why there are a lot of celebrities who are graders?
What it is that there are also plenty of graders who operate within the military field and mm-hmm. politics and mm-hmm. business and tech entrepreneurs. In actual fact, although there are a number, because it makes sense, because if you are successful and you can maintain a facade where you have a sort of, debauched bacchanalian lifestyle going on behind closed doors, but everybody thinks that you're a living saint. That's the skill of the greater. So those are the ones that have long career, where there might be a little bit of a rumor, but it's always quashed, and nobody truly knows what goes on behind those closed gates after sundown, etc. Whereas those celebrities and these who you might find amongst the mid-rangers and amongst upper lessers, them there as well, because upper lessers can be successful, but they tend to be ones where they're more likely to self-implode, because their narcissism isn't effective thinking ahead. So what they do is, they all have similar levels, of course, or you might even argue the same level of, none of them have any sense of guilt or shame or embarrassment or remorse. So that gives them ideally the tools to be grasping and self-centered. So whether upper lesser A, middle range A, or lower greater, all three of those subschools, just by way of example, are ideally equipped for being out there with sharpened elbows in different ways to get what they want, by way of controlling people, blackmailing people, persuading them, cajoling them, sleeping with them, whatever it might be, drawing in all of the fuel and getting those character traits and residual benefits. However, as they face repeated threats to control, the greater, of course, is much better at keeping that control, and is better at controlling that fuel matrix and ensuring people don't speak out, that they're loyal and they stay loyal, either through reward or potential downside. Whereas with your upper lesser, there's no facade being operated by that individual. What happens is they think it's amusing to all of a sudden, bite the head off an animal on stage, which then invites lots of condemnation, and people deciding, I'm not going to follow that, and they in effect get cancelled, as they vogue these days. So they get there, but they're perhaps not as good at staying there.
So you brought up a few good points about how the narcissist does not have any empathy, lacks remorse or guilt. And to me, after just learning so much from you through your videos and books, that's the one distinguishing characteristic that I would say is a really big red flag, is that lack of empathy. And how does that present? Well, It's going to present in the fact that they're going to consistently do things that are hurtful. So this is even a friend or a romantic partner, that you're constantly going to see things that they do that are hurtful to you, and you know, if you're a non-narcissist and you keep thinking about it, you're like, I don't understand how this person can do this without realizing that it's hurtful. And in one of our previous interviews, you had mentioned ghosting, which to a non-narcissist is very hard to imagine doing that to someone, especially if it's a friend or a romantic partner. How do you do that? It's just so hard to do. But I think for a narcissist, because of that lack of empathy, it's very easy to do. So for me, that's a huge red flag. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about ghosting and the repercussions of that in relationship to dealing with a narcissist.
Yeah, ghosting is in effect a sort of popular term that's come up, which can be used, of course, in the context of non-narcissists. As you've described, is an instance where a person is engaging with someone and they just stop and they don't explain why, and they just drift away. That behavior can be done by non-narcissists as well, and it's just simply bad manners. And there may be reasons for it. That person has gone under a bus, that's why they haven't responded, or that they've got cold feet and they feel silly about explaining why, and they've taken the coward option to not involve themselves. But in the context of where it's the narcissistic dynamic, simply what's happening there is that the narcissist is only dealing with you to the extent that you're going to satisfy the prime aims. So remember, that's what drives our behavior. When I'm talking to you in this interview, I'm not doing this of altruism. I'm not doing it, man. I'm doing it because it enables me to reach more listeners, respond to it, and it extends my legacy. That's why I'm doing it. A narcissist engages with another human being, it's always governed by the prime aims. So similarly, when they're talking to that person, perhaps online, although narcissist, if an unaware narcissist, believes they're doing it because they like this person or they're interested in them, if you were to look underneath the bonnet, look under the hood, really sees driving their behavior is the need to control this person they're talking to and to treat from them. So the conversation then ends. And at that juncture, the person this is talking to does not exist. They dissipate into the ether. If that person, say the next morning, sends the narcissist a message saying, hello, how are you? They are now on the narcissist's radar. And the narcissism then asks this question. Is this person, let's call them A, is A under control? Yes or no? Well, the content of their text message says that they're under control because they're being nice and they're asking if we are. We have control over this appliance, tick. The narcissism in the subconscious then asks this question. Do we need anything else from this person? Fuel, character traits, residual benefits? No, we don't. Answer them then, because there's no point. Now, somebody with emotional empathy would respond, oh, I'm well, thanks, how are you doing? Even if they didn't really want to have a conversation. They do it because their emotional empathy governs to be polite with the person. The narcissist doesn't have anything governing them in that respect. What governs them is this. What can I get out of this conversation? I've already got the control that I need, and I don't need anything else from it, therefore I needn't reply. If the narcissism determined we need some fuel, you get a response. If, or character traits or residual benefits, for instance, the narcissist needed some money, then you get a response. So in effect, the ghosting occurs because that in time, the narcissism determines that it isn't a satisfactory application of the narcissist's resources to continue the engagement with you. And it might be because the narcissist focused elsewhere, where a better return is being made. Why continue to drill for oil in this place if over there's more oil? And because we have no sense of guilt, no politeness, unless it has to be applied, no force, you're ghosted. And then it might be you send another message. And this time it's like, just wondering how you are. You're still showing that you're under control. Do we need anything more from them? No, so you don't. And then, what's the matter? Why aren't you replying to me? Now you're challenging the narcissist.
Right.
Now, the narcissism might, so the narcissism asks, is this person under control because bang, you've come? Answer, no, not. Right, first law of narcissism applies. All appliances must be brought under control and kept under control. So then the narcissism decides, shall we assert control by responding to? If so, you get a message. Oh, sorry, I hadn't replied. My dog got run over. Probably a lie, but there we are. Yeah. And at that moment, if it's an unaware narcissist, narcissism concocts that story by way of a pity play to nullify your threat to control, and you're back in the game. But the fact that you're pestering the narcissist now and challenging them, one way of dealing with that, and particularly if the narcissist is focused elsewhere, is to assert control, staying in position, draw, ignoring you.
Mm-hmm.
So you can end up ghosting for a variety of reasons, but it all ultimately leads to the fact that the narcissist has to have that control over you. And if the narcissist determines that there isn't anything to be gained in interacting with you, you are in effect left on the shelf. And that's then passed as being ghosted.
Yeah. I mean, the ghosting, I don't know. I mean, to me, I can't imagine someone with even a little bit of empathy feeling like it's okay to do that and not have any remorse. I don't know. But anyway, thank you for clarifying that. I wanted to touch upon parental narcissists and the making of a narcissist, because we've talked about this before, how one of the few people that actually mentions the hereditary factors, and I actually do agree with you that there's a hereditary factor in the lack of control environment. And many people assume that the lack of control environment is abuse or neglect. But again, we spoke about this. A lot of that lack of control environment is actually giving your child everything, overvaluing them, lavishing them with empty praise, with gifts, with things where, in essence, you're in control of the child and what they do and how they respond. And so that actually, there was a study recently done on a large number of children ages 7 to 11 and their parents, and they were doing a questionnaire and answering questions. And repeatedly, those children and parents who answered that there was overvaluing and empty praise actually turned out to be narcissists. So it was a big indicator of narcissism. And
okay.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk to you about that, because I know you mentioned it as a lack of control environment, which it definitely is. But so many people do this inadvertently, you know, thinking that they're providing for their children, especially if they didn't have this growing up, and they're just telling their children what to do and giving them everything, and just literally just empty, lavish praise all the time, that the child has no ability to deal with anything or conflict even when they're older. So apparently this is a risk factor. I'd love your input on that.
I would agree with that, as you've touched upon. I mentioned previously that the creation of a narcissist is through the genetic predisposition allied with what I call a lack of control environment. And a lack of a control environment can encompass physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, lack of emotional support, not being told that it's good but not good enough, and what you've touched upon here, that basically the child is lavished with empty praise where they actually haven't achieved anything, but they're told that they have. Right. And therefore that creates that lack of control environment, or that they're told they're absolutely brilliant when it's patently clear that they're not, because ultimately the child either will recognize that that's not accurate, or will go on believing the myth, and other people will see that it's not the case. But the fact is, it is putting the child in a lack of control environment because they're not actually achieving anything. They're not being able to demonstrate control to get to something. They're just being given it as a matter of entitlement. And the difficulty is, of course, is that then creates this concept, this fact of not having that control, which then the narcissism creates in order to help them as a coping mechanism, because they don't actually know how to deal with the world because everything's given to them on a plate. And it creates a rampant sense of entitlement and shows in their behaviors when they're an adult.
Right, absolutely. And it was funny because in this study, it also said the lack of parental warmth was not an indicator of future development of narcissism, which a lot of people will say, oh, you know, that's why they're doing it, right? To prevent that. But actually, that was not one of the factors, the lack of parental warmth. Not that I'm saying, you know, you have to be cold with your children, but there's different parenting styles that have been shown to actually predict the more likelihood of a child becoming a narcissist. And those are authoritarian and permissive. So authoritarian is basically what we just discussed, is the parent is in control of everything. They're rigid. They're, you know, basically telling the child, this is what you're doing. This is this. Or permissive, which is the child has free reign to do whatever he or she wants to do. Again,
Yeah.
that's also lack of control. Whereas the parental style that's highly recommended is authoritative. So what does that mean? It means that the child knows there's consequences to bad behavior. However, they have to kind of come to that conclusion. Like, for example, if you're misbehaving or didn't do your chores, well, you get screen time taken away. So that authoritative is actually supposedly the best parenting style, but the permissive and the authoritarian also indicators of development of narcissism later on. And this study mentioned children 7 to 11, which I guess is a crucial time period. So my question to you is, do you think any of these factors played a role in your development of narcissistic personality disorder?
My environment was one, basically was authoritative, and I was told, you must do this, you must achieve that, we're right, you're wrong. So it wasn't a case of me being allowed to go and do what I wanted. Of course, it then became where I sought what I wanted, as I fought against what, in effect, my captors, jailers, as I would see them, as doing. But I was in that sort of totalitarian regime of the home environment, whereby essentially my mother and members of her family, when they would come to be around, would be telling me this is the way it is. And my father, because he was too busy focused on looking after my two younger siblings, he would basically, he felt that I was able to cope. And so I was always exposed to my mother, basically, for want of a better description, ordering me about. Then I was chastised with the consequence of physical and verbal violence.
And was there as much pressure put on your siblings by your mother? I'm curious if that was a factor, or was it still similar, but then your dad was the intervener in that relationship, so he kind of saved them in a way?
Well, she always, as I come to look at it, as described as Pink Floyd me, she always had high hopes for me, because I was there to be the achiever. I was the one that was going to conquer the world, which, in a perverse kind of way, has turned out to be the case in respect of certain that I've done. Yeah. So it's almost slightly annoying that she got her wish, but she always saw, because of the level of and she decided, in essence, to sort of ally that with a no hostage approach to the world, which included me, that I would be the one who would go out there and be the achiever. I didn't think that my siblings were cut out to do as well. So she didn't have the same level of expectation. That doesn't mean that she was pleasant to them, far from it. It was also unpleasant to them. But they didn't experience the same level of correction and abuse, because it was almost a case of, well, I didn't think you'd get there anyway. Whereas with you, HG, you ought to be better. And in a strange way, my father, because he felt that they needed a bit more help, I mean, they've done well in life for themselves, they're not idiots, but he stepped in because he felt that they needed to be protected and helped, when in actual fact it was me that needed it, because I was the one to the behaviours. My father formed the view that I had the inherent coping ability to deal with my mother.
Yeah, that makes me a little sad.
Only so much.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, that's as maybe that's in the past, so it doesn't really matter. But he only had so much coping mechanism to go around, and he decided to allocate it to my brother and my sister.
Of course, and he, as an empath, was probably also devalued. So it was, again, another coping mechanism.
Oh, and absolutely. I heard much of it take place behind closed doors when he was berated, ridiculed, and no matter how many logs he threw on the fire, there was always atmosphere as a consequence of patriarch.
Yeah. And are your siblings aware of any of this? Like, do they know what your mother is, or do you have discussions with them? Like, do they say, you know, HD or narcissist, or are they're just like, oh, well, we're different from our brother and our mother's tough, but that's it.
My brother gets what she is. My sister struggles to accept it.
Okay. And do you think your sister struggles to accept it because she doesn't want to almost betray your mom as that strong female figure in the family?
I think my sister's view is because she just doesn't want to contemplate that anybody's beyond redemption. And as I often explain to my clients, you've got to lose sight of what Hollywood tries to tell you. You know, the one who's done bad, you know, at the end of the movie, they can be saved. There are people on it who cannot be saved, and nor should you even try. And my sister's one of those individuals, because she's a codependent empath. She believes that people can be saved. There is that good somewhere inside of her. And of course, when patriarch would engage in behaviours which were benign, only serving good course, my sister would jump on those as evidence of, see, she does have a heart. Of course, I know to the contrary.
Well, and I think that's a defining characteristic of an empath is they're always trying to see the good in another person. That's probably why they stay in all these abusive relationships with narcissists for so long.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
And it's driven by their addiction that they can't accept that somebody can be that way. The full horror of a person being devoid of emotional empathy is often too much for them to bear. And the helplessness. And you do get certain empaths, of course, that put themselves on that path of slavish devotion to trying to correct and aid and help these people. And they're on a hiding to nothing. And they don't like the idea that this person can't be saved. In a way, you could always say that's quite arrogant of them to think that they can always save somebody, but they do it based upon their emotional empathy and the corruption of their narcissistic trait of pride and vanity by their emotional thinking. Because logically, it would be, this person cannot be saved. They're beyond redemption. They cannot change. Don't waste your time. But instead, they think, well, you know, if I just try that bit harder, or I feel that there's progress occurring, or, you know, it's just around the corner, etc. And of course, that just similar comments by my sister, just likes an eye roll from me and my observation, it's your funeral.
Well, and it's funny that you say that because I guess empaths have just more emotional thinking than normal, for example, right? So a normal might have that emotional empathy or a little bit less of it, right? Mm-hmm. And then I guess at some point they realize this person's hopeless, but an empath is like, they keep trying and trying. And it's, you know, say, because they don't realize that other people are thinking like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Normal isn't affected by the addiction and the emotional thinking. So they have empathy. They can have lots of it.
Yeah.
But what happens is they far quicker think, this isn't getting me anywhere. I'm not putting up with this behavior.
Right.
And their emotional empathy shrinks back. So they'll think, nobody talks to me out. Whereas the empath will be, why have I made you angry? What's the matter? Can we not resolve this? Why are you not talking to me?
Yeah. You know, and that addiction is really interesting. And that brings me to my next question about the addiction of empaths to narcissists, mainly because you say they see the good in everyone. But there's a theory called repetition compulsion, which basically explains why empaths are addicted to narcissists, because they're attracted to that familiarity that they knew from maybe a childhood growing up with a parent and unhappy childhood. And it's almost their brain's way of repeating to kind of get a different outcome, right? To get a happier outcome. So there's part of that's the addiction. So would love to speak to you a little bit about that addiction to narcissists and what your thoughts are on that.
Well, it is the case that the addiction prompts that individual to be drawn but causing them to chase the storm in adulthood that they always experienced in childhood.
Yeah.
And there are those instances whereby if there was a like for like situation, they would see it and it would be obvious to them, and they would then cause them to sort of possibly shrink from that situation. But what happens is that they find themselves drawn to the narcissist without realizing that they are actually being drawn to a narcissist. They don't see it because the addiction clouds it. And they basically, narcissism feels like home. They know that it's unpleasant, but it's all that they've known. It feels familiar to them. And remember, the empath's coping mechanism has been generated to do what? Function the most effectively in the presence of a narcissist. So what gives that empath that rosy glow of contentment inside? Being around a narcissist, because it allows empaths to flex their empathic traits to the extent. The empath's true secret trait gets stuck out with an habitual liar. Lo and behold, who happens to be an habitual liar? The narcissist. The narcissist is morally bankrupt. Therefore, the moral compass of the empath comes to bear. Yeah. The narcissist might present as a broken crybaby. Therefore, that empathic trait of compassion gets a brilliant run out. Instead, the fact that the narcissist, again, middle range B, life's not fair, I'm always treated badly, the big boys have picked on me, and therefore that empathic trait of justice. They come forward, the empath comes forward, swinging that sword of justice with their shield of being a healer. And so that problematic narcissist who doesn't seem like anybody can save them, who can heal them, who can fix them, who can repair this relationship, who can, even though you're not in a relationship any longer, but you can at least be civil to one another. The empath can, through their desire to heal. So the fact is, the narcissist is the best, in inverted commas, person to enable the empath to be the empath to the fullest extent. So that person naturally gravitates towards them because it allows them to be who they are. The problem is, of course, you get abused alongside it.
Yeah. Do you find that empaths that are attracted to narcissists who have a narcissistic parent tend to choose a different school of narcissist than their parent? For example, like if you have a mother, like your mom, you said is upper middle, right? So her behavior is a certain way. So then that person might think in the back of their mind subconsciously, I don't want to marry my mother. So they go out searching for someone else who they think is not necessarily their mother's class of narcissism, but is a narcissist nonetheless because of that attraction and addiction. Have you seen that? I've seen that several times where someone is an empath and parent is for example, upper lesser. And they marry someone who's like a middle mid-ranger, for example, just because that middle mid-ranger doesn't appear as the upper lesser, still a narcissist. Again, it's that behavior, repetition of behavior that they're familiar with, and they're curious what you've seen.
I think that there are two strands to that repetition. There are some instances where it's less obvious to them, so that they just go out and repeat it, but necessarily what they've seen before.
Yeah,
and then there is the more obvious repetition, of which there's two branches to it. There is, this person reminds me of my mother, so I'm not anything to do with them. So that actually causes them to retreat. In other instances, this person reminds me of I feel compelled to be drawn to them because I couldn't save my dad, but can I save this person?
Yeah.
So I've seen instances where they just don't recognize it.
Yeah.
And then where there is a recognition of it, in some instances it causes the retreat, and other times it actually brings them closer to them because it gives them an opportunity, albeit which is being governed by emotional thinking, of perhaps being able to resolve something that they were unable to resolve as a child.
Yeah, again, it's a subconscious brain trying to figure things out. And this is why I continue to want to do these interviews with you, because again, we want to teach parents to recognize behaviors that they think might be good for their children, which in essence, not good and actually detrimental. So thank you for clarifying that. I wanted to read you something interesting that I came across. It's a quote from a New York-based psychiatrist, Dr. Frank Yeamans, who specializes in narcissistic personality disorder. I'm going to read this to you about his the synopsis of narcissists. So, deep down, narcissists hope for love and caring, but it often makes them feel very uncomfortable if they seem to find it, partly because they feel vulnerable and doubt the authenticity of any love that comes their way. They may devalue anyone who loves them because that person, like themselves, cannot live up to their excessively demanding standards. Narcissists can't grasp the concept of love as a mutual devotion that includes acceptance of flaws. Love does not sustain them, it feels elusive and unsafe. Admiration feels safer to them because they can earn admiration through achievements, which is something they can control, but love cannot be controlled, so it means taking a leap of faith. Narcissists then prefer to be admired and endlessly try to provoke admiration because that's what they know to do. Part of this distrust in love has to do with early childhood experiences. Typically, it is the role of the caregiver to be empathic and attuned to the infant. The caregiver's role is to protect and soothe the child when they are upset. In order to effectively be able to do that, they need to understand the child's internal experience. For people who develop narcissistic personality disorder, there was some breakdown in this process of empathic attunement by the parent, which prevented them from feeling loved and led them to develop an internal representation of relationship that is skewed as they vacillate between idolation and devaluation. Hence, relationships for narcissists are uneven and imbalanced, and the narcissist is usually vaguely aware that they do this vacillation between idealization and devaluation. I actually find this very accurate in what I've seen. I don't know what I don't know what your interpretation is. I know that you feel that maybe and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, that they're not really vulnerable and it's a defense mechanism and it's the way they are. But I've seen a lot of vulnerability in a lot of narcissists, so I'm really curious to your input on this.
There are some aspects of that that's accurate. It's not a case of deep down narcissists hoping for love and caring. A narcissist will really seek being loved and cared because that signals that control, and it's a demonstration of the provision of all. What makes a narcissist feel uncomfortable is any breach of that ability to control and the loss of the fuel. So it's not a case of immediately doubting the authenticity that comes our way. Far from it. Indeed, during the golden period, we think your love is the most authentic thing on the planet. Brilliant. She loves me. Control. She's the best thing since sliced bread, and she's giving me all of this lovely fuel. Where the doubt of the authenticity comes is when devaluation occurs. And the devaluation occurs isn't because, well, in a sense, it's accurate to say that the individual can't live up to our excessively demanding standards, because at the end of the day, we need that fuel to stay fresh, and eventually it won't. It'll be stale. Or if it stays, you're not giving us enough of it. So you fail to keep by that standard, which results in devaluation. So, but it's the standard linked to control and linked to fuel. In terms of the acceptance of flaws, there is some merit in that, because what we do is your flaws, because you're bound to have them, they're just painted over, so they're exacerbated back. We have no object constancy. So what we don't do is balance it and go, well, I know she criticized my Lego fire engine that I built, but she's a really good mother and she's really kind and cooks good meals and makes me laugh. So all in told, she's entitled. No, she's criticized that Lego fire engine. She is a representative of Satan. She's an awful cook. She's lousy in bed and she's an abusive mother. Because it has to be that way, because you're either with us or against us. There's no shades of grey with us. So there are some elements of what's stated here that are accurate, but it's the sensation of feeling vulnerable. That is a sense of feeling weak because of the lack of control, and the vulnerability. If a narcissist shows you vulnerability, you're just being manipulated because it's a part of a.
Well, and this doctor says that narcissists can be helped, but it takes a long time, a lot of therapy, and I guess a lot of patience in understanding what they're going through. I think you feel like no, there's no help, right?
There isn't. And
Yeah.
again, that deluded idea of thinking that you're going to be able to help somebody, whereby it is a hermetically sealed self-defense mechanism. So all that happens is that you might be able to coerce a narcissist to fit in a bit better than they have done before, but I'll only allow the narcissist to get what he or she requires. And at the end of the day, if you still get in our way, we
Yeah.
will have to deal with you, because that viewpoint that we have is fused into who we are. As I've mentioned before, there might be 100 years that there's the technology to rewire somebody's brain so that these things are changed. But through talking about it and instruction, etc., it won't, because the narcissism basically says, this person's trying to change us, this is a threat to control, we mustn't let it happen. So I would suggest that where instances it said that, I mean, I don't know if he categorizes the actual success stories or just yes, that can be done.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is that where it has occurred, that's invariably either the relevant professional in their own trumpet, they haven't succeeded, or they're dealing with someone who wasn't a narcissist, because there are people that are problematic and can change, but they're not narcissists. The narcissist isn't going to do so because the narcissism sees no reason to do so. It functions perfectly brilliantly as it does, because remember, irrespective of the number of relationships that this person has and that they're in and out of prison and they're in and out of friendships and so forth, what do they always get? They always get the control. The narcissism works. They'll always receive their fuel. Narcissism works. Everything else is around the edges. The chaos and the drama is a problem for everybody else. You might say, well, the narcissist is in and out of prison. That's what you look for a period of time. The narcissism only cares about what's happening now. And in that moment, it works brilliantly.
Mm. Well, you're a self-aware narcissist, so you're aware of all of this, and I know you know that you have flaws, right? Do you admit that you have flaws?
That I have flaws.
Yeah.
What are my flaws? You tell me.
No, I'm just saying, I mean, I as a person know that I'm not perfect, and I have certain flaws. I'm sometimes I'm a little impatient when I want things done, for example. So that's what I'm asking. You as a self-aware narcissist, are you aware of any of your flaws?
Why is impatience a flaw if somebody's not doing what you want?
Okay. I guess because it makes me tense. So you're right. Why is that a flaw? Okay.
Somebody else might think it's a flaw, but from your perspective, why is it a flaw? They're not doing what they should have done quickly enough, but to your standard, then they sort of sort themselves out and deal appropriately. Your lack of patience is a problem for them, so they label it flaw. That's because they're weak, trying to for you, because they've not done what they should have done. They're deflecting from what they should have been doing.
Okay. I mean, I'm fascinated by your response, which is, I think it's a pretty narcissistic response, right? You're not seeing that any of the reactions that one person has is necessarily a bad thing. And you know, you bring up a really good
I recognize somebody else could recognize it as a bad thing, but I don't see it as. It works for me.
Yeah.
So somebody might say, for instance, your selfishness is a flaw. You think that, I don't. My selfishness enables me to get through life very effectively indeed. I have lots of, I'm never short of having a girlfriend. I have money in the bank. I'm successful at what I do. I can go where I want. Tell me where the flaw is with my selfishness. I'm not the one that's curled up into a position crying about the loss of a relationship. I'm not the one sitting there going, I can't go to this place. I can. And I admit, if you want to call me selfish, I can understand how people would see that I am selfish, but I don't have a problem with that. I think sometimes people do better to be selfish, so then they wouldn't have as many problems that they try and burden on the rest of on other people. if they're a bit selfish with their time and they got a better job, they'd earn more. They wouldn't be causing a problem in terms of not paying enough tax, so services would be dealt with, for example. So I understand how, because again, it's a matter of perspective, that someone along and say, that's a character flaw. And I'll go, you think that because you're flawed. Yeah. You think that because you're envious of my success. You think that. And you're allowed to think it because you're allowed to put forward your view. Doesn't mean it's right, though.
Well, I think you're also different in that, number one, I think cognitively you're very intelligent. So you're able to control certain things to get your need, right? Whereas I don't know if other narcissists would see, and I don't know if they would admit that they have flaws, but I see your point in saying that
some would, Christine. They would go, yeah, you know, I'm only human and I'm flawed, but it's not genuine, because what they're doing is they're seeking to manipulate you by making you sorry for them. Now, yeah, I'd never want anybody's sympathy or pity, because I find that odious. I'm not invested in the slightest. So I was injured recently in the line of duty. And I'm sorry you got hurt. And I said, well, you're sorry, you didn't cause it. They said, well, I'm just expressing my sympathy. I said, I don't need it, thank you very much. Your sympathy is neither going to help me heal faster or improve my mood. So keep it to yourself.
And that's
people might say, well, that's rather rude. And I would say, I think it's rather rude that they're hinging their emotions on me when I ask for them. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And I've heard that from several narcissists that I know. They don't like people feeling sorry for them. Or they'll say, yeah, I like it when someone cries for me or feels sorry for me. Yeah. I don't like that, because it's that loss of control, right? You're not in control.
It is. I enjoy making somebody cry. That amuses me. But if they're crying over me, you know, they're worried about me,
yeah,
grip up. I'm a grown man. I'm perfectly capable.
Very interesting. Thank you so much, HG, for that clarification. And once again, we've run out of time, but I'm really grateful for this. And perhaps
not at all.
I'll do another interview. Thank you again.
Oh, absolutely. I always enjoy the discussions, and you always ask me interesting discussions. So it appeals to my intellect. So we will do this again. Thank you very much.
Thank you again.